that are tuning in today's episode. Our guest is a Latin paleographer, Florio Scifo. He studies culture and religions at Università La Sapienza in Rome. It belongs to organizations such as World Youth Alliance and represents Italy on the field of bioethics. He's also president of Centrum Latinitatis Europaea di Roma, that is concerned with Latin studies. A secretary at Associazione Liberamente Umani ALU, a Swiss association that is focused on human rights, and a board member of Universitari per la Vita, for whom in 2020 he has curated a book on bioethics. Welcome.
Thank you, Milda, and greetings to everyone here.
Thank you. Our movement is very glad to have met you 2 years ago, and that we found like-minded people on the other side of Europe.
Yes, it was great to have this this connection between movements all across Europe, and to meet all these great people from Lithuania, from Latvia, from Germany, from
Yes.
Austria, from all across Europe. So yes, I'm very happy for this opportunity that we constructed in these years.
Yes. And before we start, I would like to have your insight in general. And recently I've been thinking that the world is at crossroads and symbolically at the foot of the Tower of Babel. And with euthanasia, eugenics, gene therapy, or so-called COVID-19 vaccine, invasive sex change, even artificial insemination, human is trying to take place of God. And I'm thinking of, how do you see the situation the world finds itself in?
Well, this is a quite complicated question. I can say that I agree with this analysis, but we have to consider that it's not a thing that has started now in these few years. Actually, it's a thing that started maybe from the humanism, so in the 16th century, because this was a long process in which men tried, and they are still trying. The more the technique goes on, the more they try to replace God and to think that they are gods. This in my studies, it's a thing that we call hybris. So it's something that is a false desire, false aspiration that actually cannot have another path than destruction of man, because it's something that man cannot control, and that can create only damages. To avoid or to not consider our role in this world, and only to be egoistic and superhuman, to quote Nietzsche. So the process is not actual, not really, not something that happened in these few years, but in these few years we saw an acceleration of it due to the concrete situation, to the what I call scientism, so a blind faith in science that basically transformed this fight, this like fight, transformed doctors and scientists in general in new popes, in new priests, and in people who can actually control the life of every human person, because according to this idea, they can give answers to every our necessity. Well, this is also this is a very materialistic idea that, in fact, cannot answer to our desires, to all our aspiration as man. And this process was very well analyzed by an author that I really like. It was Clive Staples Lewis, who lived in the past century, in the 20th century. He was a professor at the University of Oxford, and he wrote a lot of romances. He's very famous, a lot of novels. He's very famous for the Chronicles of Narnia, that is a fantasy novel, and because he was a friend of John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. But he also wrote another novel called That Hideous Strength. And in that novel, he imagined a world in which scientists took the power, and they basically tried to organize all the life of the people without considering any sort of moral limit. So they were just considering what they could do as scientists without any limit. And this situation is quite actual also, because we are facing in these years the same thing. Scientists that have no moral in some cases, unless what they can do with their technologies. And in the novel, it was clearly explained that the end of this process, so a process of dominion of man over nature, over morality, over God, cannot be a good process, because men actually will be submitted to their own desires. So they will think to have overcome nature, but they will become like beasts. Because if we consider a beast an animal, we know that animals are only guided from their instinct. And this is basically the risk, to be guided only from what we think is our advantages, is our desire, and not to what is objectively moral and objectively good. So to confound, to mix, and to get confused between what is good and what is bad. So yes, that's it. Also in the religion, this was very evident, because especially during this lockdown and these years, all the liturgies also were considered, also the sacraments for Christians were considered as the things that we can skip, not really necessary for our life. And this created new idols, so to speak, that are basically instruments. So men became slaves of their own instruments, scientific instruments, and this is quite dangerous.
I remember you wrote about mass being shown to the people via internet, and it's to whom do you pray during this process? To the screen or to the actual God? Because it's not behind the computer.
Yes, this thing of the mass via internet is a very concrete problem for Christians, because via internet you cannot receive the sacraments, and also the presence in a sacred place, so in a church, is something that you should not skip or consider as not relevant, because it is actually relevant, extremely relevant. So the impossibility to receive the concrete sacraments online, and the absence from sacred places that were closed because of this fear of COVID. So definitely the elimination of the problem of the salus animarum, so the health, so to speak, of the souls, that should be the first law of the church according to the canonic law, is a concrete problem that was verified in these past few years.
And going back to Lewis's work, where you mentioned that if humans go by their desires and they act like animals, well, animals are considered not to have soul. So how did they, in the book, imagine their own end? Like, what happens when you die if you go by desires?
Well, this is also another philosophical question, because the problem of the soul in animals is a question that is still discussed, because if this depends on the definition of soul. There are some philosophers and also some theologists that distinguish between the soul and the spirit, according also to St. Paul, in which is written in once, I think, in one letter, that there is a difference between the soul and the spirit. So the soul is the material one, so is what allow us to live, allow our body to function. So it's the reason why our heart beat and our body function. And this is common between mankind and animals. Then there is the spirit that is specific of human people, and this is what basically we call the image of God. So it's the highest part of our soul that let us to love God, to elevate our personality, so to speak, over our simple body. So this is a difference between a pure materialistic philosophy, that is the philosophy that is most spread here in the actual times, and more spiritual philosophy that is not stopped. That doesn't stop in this concrete world, so it's not stopped by that, for so to speak.